I have a feeling that I'm going to be the most controversial among the two, so we'll start with the confrontational and end with the reconciliation. That's possibly Andy's idea of getting me to speak first. Now, the topic that I've given, or the title that I've given for the abstract, Tamil moderate politics and discontent among Tamil youths in Sri Lanka, some introductory notes on their relationship from 1948 to the present. Just before we started, we had this discussion on quality, where some of our friends from Batticalow were suggesting that you have to be careful about integrity in research to make sure that the I is not too present in the research that you do, or how you are careful about the I in the research, etc. So I have to make this disclosure at the very beginning that some of the things that I will be suggesting, particularly to the rear end, I am actively involved in at the moment. So you'll have to take it with that either pinch of salt or bag of salt, whichever way you see it. But I must concede that, I look at this not just from a researcher perspective, but more from an activist perspective. So I need to make the disclosure at the very beginning. Now, though this abstract sounds like I'm going to take a very sort of historical sketch, it's a historical study of Tamil politics from a particular point of view, I must say that I'm not going to bore your time with going through the history per se. There is also a prescriptive part to this research that I'm proposing. I'm still working on this, so that's what I'm going to spend most of my time on. And what is this prescriptive part? I talk about the objective of this paper will be to compare this emerging trend in contemporary Tamil politics with that of the politics of the yesteryear, and to then draw lessons from for the direction that Tamil politics can take today to prevent a slide down to a more violent form of politics. Now, I need to explain that, and I will do that, but that's the prescriptive side of what I want to do, and that is what I intend to spend most of my time on. So I'm sorry for those of you who are least familiar with the Sri Lankan situation, that it's going to be very... Yes?
Can you repeat that? Can you keep the mic?
Yes, I will repeat it. Yes, so the objective of this paper will be to compare this emerging trend in contemporary Tamil politics. I will explain as to what this emerging trend in contemporary Tamil politics is with that of the politics of yesteryear, and to then draw lessons for the direction that Tamil politics can take to prevent a slide down to a more violent form of politics. Right? Now, the history, the title says Tamil moderate politics and discontent among Tamil youths. What is the relationship between the two? And I think it's a particular feature of Tamil politics post-independence. And a lot of us know about and I am assuming this, that we know about the more sort of history of Tamil politics, particularly with to do with discontent among Tamil youth with regard to Tamil moderate politics. And I use these terms, I know, without challenging them. I do have problems with the word, with the usage of the word moderate, discontent, so on and so forth, but I'm not going to complicate myself in dealing with those. I'm going to just take them as words in terms of their normal meaning, quote unquote normal meaning. Now, you may want to question me on that, but we can look at that later. Now, from the days of 1949, the split between the Federal Party and the All Ceylon Tamil Congress, and particularly with the signing of the Banda-Chelva Pact, within the Tamil community there has been a lot of debate, particularly among young people, young political activists, and the Tamil political leadership as with regard to the course that Tamil politics should take. And for example, in a delegate conference of the Federal Party on the 28th of July 1957, the Federal Party leadership was critiqued for entering into the Banda-Chelva Pact, which, among other things, provided for that the administrative language in the North and East would be Tamil, that regional councils would be set up, and this was compared, and the youth were asking at this delegate conference question to the Federal Party leadership, you told us that you will be asking for equal status for the Tamil language. Why have you compromised on the question with just a limited form of status in the sense of Tamil becoming administrative language in the North and East? And then the Tamil version of the Ilangai of the Federal Party is the Ilangai Tamil Arasu Katchi. So you have used the word Tamil Arasu, which means Tamil state. How come you have compromised for something like the regional councils? Was a question that was raised at this conference. And quite interestingly, as we'll note later, uh, following the and the response, I mean, this whole question, I mean, the kind of reading that you can do about this question of the name that the federal party chose for itself in Tamil and English, there is very interesting reading for this. If you want, you can read Imaya Varamban's Tamil piece. It's a very short monograph called Thandai Maindaram, where he, I mean, a lot of people know who Imaya Varamban is. It is Professor Sivasekaram, Professor of Engineering attached, retired Professor of Engineering, who was attached to the University of Peradeniya, who wrote that piece. So there's a lot of reading that you can do. So I don't want to go into the history. But I think, to be fair by the ITAK, the you know what the questioning is. How come you've used federal in your English name? How come you've used Tamil state, Tamil Arasu in your Tamil name? The response was that, for example, Tamil Nadu in across the Park Strait was called Tamil Arasu, and Tamil Nadu meaning country. And this is a separate research that needs to be done. The type of inspiration that federal party politics of the 50s and 60s took from the Dravidian politics in Tamil Nadu. You take the whole question of the singular Sri, of pouring tar on the singular Sri, the type of agitational politics of that time has a lot of parallels with Dravidian politics, particularly with the politics of the Dravida Munnetra Kalagam in Tamil Nadu. So I have a feeling that when the founders of the federal party they probably were hopefully thinking about a Tamil name first and then looking for an English translation for it. They did not necessarily mean that these meant two different things, but that's giving them a fair interpretation, a reasonable interpretation. But there is no research that has actually gone into, let's say, the minutes of that federal party meeting in terms of how they use the name, etc., etc. And then you move down to the 1965 pact between Dudley Senanayake and Chelvanayagam, which was probably conceding much more than what they conceded in the Banda Chelva pact. They came down to district councils. Dudley was dragging his feet on the district council, and very interestingly, at this 1966 July meeting of the youth front of the ITAK. The leader at that time of the youth front was later the leader of the TULF and also opposition leader of Sri Lanka, Amrithalingam. He was a leader of the youth front at that time. And the deputy leader at that time was a long-serving parliamentarian of the ITAK from Battikalo, Rajadurai. Rajadurai made a stirring speech at the youth conference of the ITAK, where he criticized in very severe terms the ITAK leadership at that time, and they had an election soon after that, and Amrithalingam lost his presidency of the youth wing of the ITAK, and Rajadura won it. So it's very interesting as to how this shapes in. And we will know that later on, Amrithalingam himself took the role that almost Rajadura did in the 1976 context, where the Vatakota resolution is passed asking for a separate state for the Tamils, where the federal party comes out. Some of this history is known, but I think it needs to be gone into much more detail. We need to look at historical sources much more in detail in terms of how this worked out. A lot of you know about the Suyachi Kalaham that was started by V. Navaratnam, an MP for Kites for 6 years, I believe. V. Navaratnam should not be confused with V. N. Navaratnam of Chavagacheri, but V. Navaratnam of Kites, who's also sometimes said to be the ideologue, the sort of idol or the idol ideologue that Mr. Prabhakaran himself relied on for in terms of how his views were shaped at the very beginning. So Suyachi Kalaham was formed soon after the Dudley Silva Pact. Navaratnam walked out of the ITAK and founded the Suyachi Kalaham at that time. But very interesting to note, both at the 70 elections and the 65 elections, Chelvanayagam was very adamant in one saying that we should not take to arms to fight for our rights, and he was also very adamant in saying that a separate state is not the option, or it's not the option. 1970 elections particularly, this was true, and he contested it on a vigorously federal platform, which had been their policy from 1949, but 1970 is probably where it was more sort of, vigorously campaigned for, and then you go into the Constituent Assembly, where this basic resolution is introduced, as unitary for the constitution, and then Chelvanayam walks out, and that probably begins in Tamil history, in Tamil political history, the move away from wanting to engage with the governments in the south in terms of finding a reasonable accommodation towards a separate path, as some people call it, which possibly solidified in 1976. But then again, in 1976, there is a Vatakota resolution, then you have the 1977 elections. But Mr. Amrithalingam then taking up the opposition leader position without any semblance of any regard for irony. Then in 1981, the TULF representatives on the Presidential Commission on District Development Councils, Mr. Neelam Thiruchelvam, Dr. Neelam Thiruchelvam, and Professor A.J. Wilson author a report providing for the District Development Act, which the TULF accepts and contests elections under, but within 2 years, 1983 happens, and there is a shift in Tamil politics towards what I call the young people, sort of, the young militants. And the history after that. So in a sense, so here was tension within the sort of Tamil political circles between the youth and the political leadership in terms of the kind of the manner in which they thought Tamil politics should progress. And in post 1976 to 83, you see a shift in politics where young people become the dominant sort of factor of Tamil politics. Now the TNA comes in, the entry of TNA into this picture is very interesting. The TNA is formed in 2000. One of the main movers behind the TNA, which is acknowledged by all, was Tharaki Sivaram. And 5 minutes more. Tharaki Sivaram. Tharaki Sivaram, there is a biography of him which Andy referred to earlier during the session today. That's Learning Politics from Sivaram by Professor Mark Whitaker. And in that section where he talks about the TNA, Sivaram points to the fact that the reason why the TNA was floated was because he thought at that time in Tamil politics, the moderate and the extremist, the moderate represented by, let's say, the TULF, and the extremists represented by the militant groups, more particularly by the LTT, were being dichotomized, and that dichotomy was being used to sort of split quote-unquote Tamil unity. And so as to break this dichotomy, the TNA is formed, whereby the moderates become the parliamentary representatives of the quote-unquote extremists. Right? Now, this is the founding objective of the TNA according to the sort of philosophy that at least one of its founders had, and probably it was shared across the board. Now, 2009, the LTT is militarily defeated, and TNA is left on its own in terms of Tamil politics. And the question, and I thought at that time there had to be a rethink about what the TNA's role is. I mean, if the founding objective of the TNA was about breaking this dichotomy in Tamil politics and using that wedge, I thought there was because the extremist element, quote unquote, the extremist element, the military element of Tamil politics, the armed sort of struggle part of Tamil politics had come to an end. So I thought there had to be a serious thought of what the TNA was doing. But my feeling is, to cut the long story short, what I claim that TNA has gone back to Tamil moderate politics as it existed, has actually gone back to a form of politics that resembles pre-1981 politics, where they consider that their role is to negotiate with the government, and added to, I mean, there are certain crucial differences. The international community possibly now plays a crucial role, etc., but they have, I think, gone back to a sort of, let's compromise, let's take what we can at the moment. We should not be using the word nation and self-determination in our articulation of what Tamil rights are. We should be talking about ourselves as minority who are asking for equal rights, so on and so forth. So there's been a lot of tone down. Now, this is where it becomes slightly personal. I mean, there is a memo that was put out by 76 people from representing fairly a broad spectrum of people, where they have raised some of these issues. This toning down of language from claim of articulating Tamil politics from a nationhood, self-determination point of view, to being a minority asking for equality rights. So all of this has been done because they think this is the best way. I mean, irrespective of the fact that they keep telling the people, the Tamil people, to the elections that they stand for a Tamil nation which has a right to self-determination within a united Sri Lanka. I mean, these 76 who have signed up also agree that it has to be within a united Sri Lanka, but they have dropped that language, we accuse, in Colombo, Washington and New Delhi. So you find that, it's a reverting back to let's try to work it out. So where do we go from here? Now, there is growing discontent, I think, against TNA, but that should not be misrepresented as an electoral weakening of the TNA. I think they are electorally still the dominant force, unquestionably the dominant force in Tamil politics. And I think they will remain to be that for a period to come. This is because the Tamil polity, and I'm generalizing when I say this, thinks that unity is the main sort of factor in Tamil politics that we should be demonstrating. I mean, you can, and hence that they don't want to see the TNA splitting up or there being disunity within the Tamil polity at the moment. So I think they will be the most relevant electoral sort of body, electoral representatives of the Tamil people for a period to come. But what do you do with this growing discontent? And I think this is, given the sort of context that we live in, particularly in the north and east, but also elsewhere, but I'm particularly referring to the north and east, where you are possibly living in a transcendental period of where different sorts of oppressive forces are trying to pin down any creation of space of dissent or criticism of any type of politics. Irrespective of that, there is some discontent that is coming out. I mean, there is definitely against the government, but also against the TNA in terms of its strategy. And I think what the TNA should be doing at this point is to look beyond doing Tamil politics as only constrained to negotiating with the government. I think the TNA thinks mostly that their politics is confined to talking to the government, engaging with diplomatic missions in Colombo. I think that's not enough, and that definitely should not be the main focus of Tamil politics at the moment. I think you need to engage in a much more creative way, and I've written about this in the past in Tamil, that we need to look at ways through which, through non-violent means, you work outside of the state, but keep challenging the present state structure so that you can deliver on this. How do you do this? I think, for example, a strong presence of our Tamil political leaders in the north and east itself will do. For example, I've suggested that, in Vanni, 2 MPs having a residence in Vanni, staying with the people, showing solidarity, can help challenge the sort of military environment there. This is also true of the islands in Jaffna. Maybe they can think of a way in which I'm not a believer in the court system of Sri Lanka, but think of a mass litigation sort of move which would have some political sort of effects of taking about 500 to 800 of the political prisoners' case to the court and challenging the court system, in a way challenging the whole system of our judiciary to respond to the needs of the people, and also in some way to start, and on this point we've been vocal for a while now, that when funders, I mean, one of the things that you find is the government keeps saying that development is what the Tamil people are asking for, and that is what need to be given. In fact, Mr. C.R. De Silva, the LLRC chairman, used to say this during the sittings. That is why I'm surprised that Mr. C.R. De Silva in the LLRC Commission report can come out and say there are genuine grievances of the Tamil people with regard to political power, state reform and all of that, because he never exhibited any of those, and I find it very difficult to find any commissioner, LLRC commissioner, who actually exhibited that sort of an understanding while the sittings were happening. If you look at the transcripts of the LLRC, that will be shown. But anyway, so if one of the things that you find is that most of the development work that is being done in the north and east is donor funded. So if we can, I mean, what we need to challenge is challenge the donor community with alternative proposals. I mean, it's a process through which, while being within the state, you challenge the state structure, and that is the kind of thinking that I think we need in Tamil politics. Now, all of this might raise quite a lot of concern, and I understand, I'm willing to engage with those concerns. There's 0 minutes, but just to say this, all of this is also premised on what I've said is that Tamil nationalism is a good force. Now, I know that most of you have doubts about it, but I have defended. I don't subscribe to the view that nationalisms are inherently bad. I think I think in terms of providing a context of choice, group identities are important, and institutional expression of that politically is important. All that can be defended, but I don't want to go into that theoretical niceties for the moment. But I know that there can be a fundamental challenge to what I have all said, to say that. And I think, as I've said, I've written in the past, that the future of Sri Lanka lies in a plurinational Sri Lanka, where there are nationalisms that are positive in their outlook, that worry about their positive content, but are not non-threatening to each other. So singular nationalism doesn't threaten Tamil nationalism doesn't threaten Muslim nationalism doesn't threaten upcountry nationalism, so on and so forth. So we need to build and think about nationalisms that are non-threatening, but are about positive content, about how to move forward your communities in a positive sense. Thank you.